does is obviously it bases the selection upon the color you click on. And that's not a very good image to be using. Let's try one more time. There we go, there's color in this one. Or more than one color. Alright, as you can see, or not see, let me zoom in. Alright, we have a nice little image here. Well, if we just want to select this building, that's going to be pretty damn hard because there's no perfect boundary to click on. So sometimes you can select by color, and as you can see, it selects pretty much everything around the color we clicked on. Well, you can adjust that threshold for how many variations of that color, or how far off that color it can go. Over here where it says threshold, you click the higher numbers and your selection grows, as you can probably see or probably not see. I'm not sure once this video is resized, but your selection grows based on the threshold that you set over here. Now the other thing is the hard line difference between colors, and that is the magic wand. And I know I said earlier I didn't use it, but I meant the fuzzy select. Alright, so let's hit Control-Shift-A to unselect everything. The magic wand selects borders more than colors. Wherever there's a difference, a hard difference between borders, between colors, it considers it a border. For example, here in this area you have the sky, and in this area you have the dome. Well, there's a difference between the colors around that dome and around this building. So clicking in the sky will, for the most part, select the sky minus the dome. Now, depending on how hard of a color difference there is, it's really nice. But if you've got some weak color differences, for example, the top of this dome is dark because it's being lit from the bottom, so it kind of blends in with the sky, well, part of it gets selected, and that becomes that becomes a pain in the neck. But that's what this tool does. And of course you can adjust its threshold by clicking the higher or lower number over there in your tool options. And also in your tool options, you can do the same thing with your select boxes too. Where I said earlier, you can do the minus selection or plus selection. Well, you can also just click over here in the toolbox whether you want to minus a selection, or in other words, add to a selection or take away from a selection with a new selection. But I find it's easier to just use your select or your modifiers on your keyboard, the Control and Shift. Alright, the cut tool, I never really mess with that or that. I'll tell you what, the ink pen tool, or paths tool, whatever you want to call it, looks like an ink pen. That tool I do use every once in a while. You can actually click in one spot and then click in another spot and create a solid line, and then click in another spot, create a solid line again. You can do that around the page, and then click one more time and let go, and then click inside that last one, and you can actually drag it back on top of your first one and create a shape. And over here it says stroke path, and you can tell it how wide you want the line to be. And matter of fact, I ought to leave it big. And then you can tell it to stroke, and as you can see, whatever lines you just made, it puts a pen line around them, or a paintbrush, whatever you want to call it, it does it. And it's pretty neat. And you can adjust it also by, let's see, you can take your little shape and then click on in the middle in between points, and you can drag it out, and you'll see drag handles pop up on the screen, and you can adjust your selection varying by those drag handles. You'll start creating curves and everything else, as you will be able to see right now. So it comes in handy sometimes. Alright, and let's see, don't really use any of those. The rotate tool, it's pretty self-explanatory. It just rotates arbitrary number of degrees. I guess you specify at the bottom, but I never really use it, as it's easier just to usually when you're rotating something, you're rotating a whole layer or a whole image. So it's best just to go to Image, Transform, Flip, or blah blah blah, and then right below that there's the rotate options. Alright, and the text option, click on the letter A. That's your text tool. Now as you can see, when you click on the letter A, down here you've got a bunch of options related to font. You've got the font name right here, or font face, or whatever you want to call it, and here's where it lists all the fonts installed in your system, and you can select from a font to use with this tool. Right underneath that's the font size and the unit of measurement, which is best to leave it default. And anti-aliasing is a little bit beyond the scope of a beginner's topic, but I'll just say real quickly, if it's an extremely small font, if you're typing something that's going to be very, very small, uncheck that box. Anti-aliasing smooths out your font so that it looks less rigid, and that's good for average or big fonts, but for small fonts it makes them blurry, so you need to uncheck that. Alright, and then underneath that is color. You can select the color you want the font to be, and when you type, it'll open a little dialog box, and that's where you type what you want it to say. And then when you're done, you can hit close. Now after you've entered that in, you can actually go back and edit it if you want by clicking back inside that box, back inside your original text, and you can go and edit it some more. Huh. That's interesting. It didn't update my font. Oh, okay. It's because it pushed it down a line. Evidently they changed this tool also. Shows you how much I keep up with this stuff. Like I said, I'm not a graphics expert by any means. Anyway, alright, so that's pretty much the gist of how you work your font. And you can do a lot of neat things with font, especially when you start working with layers, which is this little option over here. And we'll explain layers later on. But when you get to the layers area, you will see how useful they really are. I know when I first started out working with images, I never understood what the hell the layers were for and why anyone would use them. And then after I got to messing with them and understood what they were used for, I found out just how useful they are. You can't live without them, really, especially if you make your own graphics for your website or your business or whatever. All right, Paint Bucket. That's pretty much a universal icon, and I believe every little paint program from Microsoft Paint to Adobe Photoshop Pro has a paint bucket, and everybody should know what it is. It just dumps color into your selection. The thing is, there's a couple different ways to dump the color. As you can see, I just clicked inside this text box, and you can still see white. Well, that's because it fills regions, and where the text is, that's a hard border, so it can't fill inside the text. It'll fill any area that's it'll fill all solid colors that you click on. So if you click on white, anything that's white is getting changed. But once it gets to the red letters, it stops because that's a different color. Well, to alternate that, or to alter that, you can hit the shift button. The shift button will fill the entire selection no matter what. As you can see, it just entirely just filled that whole box. And another option you have is the control button. The control button actually, as you can see here, you've got two colors on your palette at all time, and you can change what the colors are by clicking on them. For example, our foreground color is red. Well, if we wanted to change that to black, which is the default, you can click OK. And then our background color is white, and we could change that to red. Well, as you can see, clicking in here, we blacken everything. Hitting shift click or control click will use our background color instead of our foreground color, and hitting control shift click will fill the entire selection with the background color, or just hitting shift click will fill the entire selection with the foreground color. And you could switch if you for example, you want to swap colors. You could actually click this little arrow, double-ended arrow right here, to switch which one's background and which one's foreground. And that's kind of a neat little shortcut. Unfortunately, I can't find an option to set that as a keyboard shortcut, so it's kind of aggravating to keep moving your mouse over there. Slows things down a bit. Anyway, that's the gist of the paintbrush tool. Gradient tool is kind of nice. It's L is the shortcut for gradient. And by the way, to see